So that was a fairly immediate benefit or effect that I noticed in meditation. I didn't reach any sort of interesting or advanced levels of concentration or experience or mental state or anything like that. It was mostly just painful and hard work. But it did teach me acceptance, I guess. And like I said, this space became available to me afterwards.
Alright guys, so I'm back and we're doing a little bit of filming here on the way between Amsterdam and somewhere in the middle of Belgium where we're going to do a little Vipassana retreat. And this is the first clip that I'm recording in the Netherlands, so if my tone or demeanor sounds a little bit different than usual, that's probably my my international self kicking in. Now, it's not that I'm driving hands-free, I am driving here with Jorma. Jorma is a good buddy of mine. We've known each other for the best part of, what is it now, 15 years?
2003. So
2003, so yeah, somewhere thereabouts. And so what's interesting is Jorma and I usually get together once every month or so, and we have some very deep conversations about all manners regarding meditation, yoga, self-transformation, a little bit of business, and we talk a little bit about girls every now and then as well. Though that topic has been in the background for the most part, I would say, for the past few times. And so what I thought I'd do on this one is, since we are on our way to a Vipassana, and we'll get into what that means, is to try and record a before and after, and see how that pans out. So for those of you who don't know what a Vipassana retreat is, and this is my first time as well, so we'll ask Jorma for his take on it. This is a very specific type of meditation retreat in which you, for a minimum of 10 days, withdraw from the world. Your phone is taken away from you. You have no contact with the outside world. You enter a strict diet. You are not supposed to speak or have any bodily or eye contact with your retreat. What would you call them? Friends, companions,
meditators, yeah.
Or the other meditators.
So
in
you
the
essentially just don't communicate in any way for 10 days.
That's right. So you are essentially withdrawing from the world, and every source of pleasure or distraction that you use as little crutches throughout the day in your daily life, often because you are addicted to them or just because you want to get a little kick or distract yourself, are taken away from you. And from what I've heard, the effects can be pretty profound, apart from the fact that you're meditating 8 hours plus every day or so.
It's like 10.
Or more like 10. So now this is something that Jorma has done. I've never done it, and we had spoken about it before, but my feeling is that I wasn't really ready for it because I hadn't gotten a taste of the benefits of meditation in general, but also a taste of how pleasurable meditation can be in and of itself. And unless you have at least one of those two, the likelihood that you would put up with 10 days of doing nothing other than meditating is extremely slim and probably not very enjoyable to go into. But since I got a little bit of those now, we spoke about this at the end of last year, and we said, well, let's just drive to Belgium, sign up for the whole thing, and so here we are. Now, the idea of doing the before and after was to, let's say, take a bit of a snapshot of our mindset as we go into this thing. See where we stand in terms of the quality and depth of our meditation, and also some of the insights that we have kind of acquired by practicing this stuff in the past years, and whether there's a noticeable change during the retreat or after that. There's really no telling what what the feel is going to be at the end of the retreat. So I'm very curious about that. But one thing that I've been trying to practice as we're leading up into this is not to think about it too much. So we've been going into the whole power of now discussion in the past clips, and making a big deal out of the fact that anticipating stuff is essentially useless. So what I've been, I don't know if it's been all that conscious or whether I put that much effort into it, but I've truly not gone into what the retreat is going to be like, because I don't think it's a very useful thing. Getting either high expectations about it or working yourself up into a bit of an anxious state by wondering whether you're going to be able to crack the 10-hour-a-day sittings and things of this kind. So so there's very little expectations from my side in terms of that. But so having said all that, I think it'd be really cool for Jorma to say a little bit about his first retreat, which was, I think, 6 years ago or so.
No, it was more. It was in 2006, so it was 12 years ago.
So 12 years ago.
I actually went with a friend as well. My friend Bono took me. Well, basically, it's so I'll tell you a little bit about Vipassana as taught by S.N. Goenka, which is the founder of this type of retreat. Basically, it's Buddhist meditation stripped of most of the Buddhism. So it's the technique of meditation without most of the religious bits, and it consists of two different types of meditations. Really, you start out with Vipassana meditation, which is mindfulness of the breath. So you pay attention to your in and out breath in the present moment, and you try to sharpen your concentration. And then after I think it's a couple of days, when you hopefully have sharpened your concentration to a point where you can hold it onto your meditation subject for a bit longer, you start doing, it's Anapana meditation that you start out with. That's the meditation on the breath. And then you do Vipassana meditation, where you take your awareness and you move it around your body to sense basically just your bodily sensations and your thoughts and your feelings. And that's what you do for 10 days. About 10 hours a day in silence, with basically pre-recorded instructions from Goenka. In terms of what it's going to be like, it's going to be long, and it's going to be painful. Aches will appear. Doesn't really matter how you start out sitting, but you will get some discomfort somewhere, and you'll get the opportunity to breathe through them, basically, and to remain equanimous. And basically, that's one of the major points of the practice, is to experience actually how everything rises and passes away, and to what degree it's possible to not get swept up in those feelings and in your own annoyance or clinging or rejection of those sensations. So that's basically the idea. And like any mindfulness or any meditation session, there's an ebb and a flow to this. You start out optimistic and happy, and then you start to become boring or painful or difficult, and then you have a tough time, and then you come out the other end, and it seems easier, and maybe you have some good meditation sessions, and you start clinging to those, and then you lose those, and then you're upset that you don't have the pleasant feelings anymore, and then you realize that those two will pass away, and it's all just states. So that's basically it.
Cool. So I think that's on the one hand, one of the things that attracted me to this was this idea that you strip away, first of all, the what would you call it, mystical, or the narrative or the spiritual aspects from it.
To manage expectations, there's going to be some chanting and some cultural stuff, but it's not going to be overly Buddhist. I mean, it's mostly focused on the practice of mindfulness, and not so much the concepts like karma and stuff.
And so, if you, I don't know to what degree you were already into meditation the first time you went with Ono to the Vipassana, but how would you say this one changed your meditation? Also, what kind of insights did you get from the first experience?
I wasn't actually meditating much. I'd only meditated a few times with Ono before we went on this retreat. So I actually came in fairly cold the first time, having sat maybe for a maximum of a few hours total. And I would actually recommend it as a jumping off point to get into meditation, because it's also condensed and intensive. You can't help but have some effect, and those effects actually, in my case, well, the effect I discovered immediately was the ability to create some space between a sensation, some input, and my reaction to it. And in that space, I would be able to make a choice rather than just react to whatever inputs I would receive. So that was a fairly immediate benefit or effect that I noticed in meditation. I didn't reach any sort of interesting or advanced levels of concentration or experience or mental state or anything like that. It was mostly just painful and hard work. But it did teach me acceptance, I guess. And like I said, this space became available to me afterwards.
Mm-hmm. So what do you make of, we were talking a little bit just before we started rolling on the video, and you commented on how not everybody who enters the retreat makes it to the end, because perhaps the intensity or some of the challenges that come up once you strip your life of all the little crutches. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later, but it seems to me like you need to have a certain disposition or a certain character, or understand why you would be doing something like this if you are to go the distance as a beginner. And thinking also about, say, the method of yoga. I had been looking into the 8 limbs, what you call the Ashtanga or the Raja Yoga. And yoga starts from asanas, which are the postures, and then progresses on to pranayama, the breath work, and only then you get into contemplation, meditation, and some of the higher states. And I somewhere read that part of the logic behind that is that you start with the most gross or easily tangible and easy to grasp aspects of the method of yoga. Mm-hmm. Meaning asana is easy to understand because you know what it is like to bend your leg in a certain way or place yourself in a certain posture, as opposed to jumping into the deep end of meditation, because it's very intangible and you're likely to get discouraged by either lack of progress or the fact that a lot of feelings and things bubble up. So would you say that the going straight into Vipassana is something you recommend for everyone, or would you place conditions before somebody would take a retreat of this kind?
Well, some basic mental stability is advisable, I would say. If you're very, if you're prone to depression, for example, or have strong emotional volatility, then perhaps it's a bit too intense. Apart from that, anybody that's of normal sanity and normal physical capabilities is perfectly capable of sitting for 10 days. There's no, people always tell me that they couldn't do it, but there's nothing to do except not speak and sit. I mean, we can do both those things very, very easily, and it's just a matter of making up your mind and sticking to it. So some perseverance is required, but it's also something that you practice as you sit there. In fact, you'll get a lot of opportunities to practice perseverance, which is one of the things that it's good for as well, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's a benefit, I would say.
Yeah. So I'm still a little bit divided, and I mean, maybe it was my own cautious of not because I remember we talked about going less year, and I was like, I'm not quite yet there, and it was partly because I don't think I understood meditation well enough, but I wasn't pulled by it. This time I'm going not because I'm sort of ready to push through, but rather because I'm truly pulled into this, and I want to do it. But to your point about any individual who's relatively sane can do it, I remember you and I being in the way we met was in this MBA 15 years ago, and I don't think it's a stretch to say that we were not the average individual in that class. We were probably one of the top. You were the top performer during that year. I was, I think, probably the second best guy, and there were a handful of people who had their act together. But then the rest of the 41 classmates were not necessarily performing at their best on subjects that were, if you were to put your head down and study, you would perform relatively well. If I had to guess, right? Would you say that this is similar, or would you say, well, no, this is so simple that, hey, if you just go there and let's say make your mind up, you'll crack it. And what I'm trying to get to is, I don't think. I think we are, even though we wouldn't classify ourselves as competitive necessarily. I think we perform relatively well on a given task, and that could be a physical thing, or it could be at work or whatever. So that's more my would be more my caveat on it.
Well, the very unmindful emotion of pride comes into the whole thing, because basically they ask you to commit to doing the full 10 days. At several stages before you start the actual meditation. So as you sign up, you actually state that you will do the full 10 days. Then they send you a reminder saying, hey, are you still up for this? And when you say yes, you also acknowledge that you're going to do the whole retreat, and you won't quit halfway through. And then when you register later on today, you will again promise, basically, that you will, once you do this, then you will finish it.
Yep. So there's an element of commitment that you introduce early on in the whole.
They make you commit at least 3 times, and it might even be 4. So you've explicitly committed to doing this and seeing it through. And to be honest, I'm too proud to then walk out. Which in this case can be very useful, if not maybe the most enlightened state.
Sure. Yeah. So there's an element of I wonder if we both appear in the shot if we do this. I don't know. We'll try it out. So there is an element of putting in a little bit of effort, let's say.
Oh, there's a lot of effort
to see it through.
But actually, I mean, if you look into any Buddhist practice, effort and just putting in the practice is an essential part of the whole path.
Right. I was listening to some lectures by Kuladasa. You remember the big Yates. I hadn't found him on YouTube until I looked for him a couple of days ago. And he had a very interesting answer to a question that's related to that. The guy said, well, the interviewer asked, so isn't it an idea to look for an object of meditation that is so appealing to the mind that it would make your focusing on it easier? Right. So in other words, you trick yourself into a meditative state.
A good movie, say.
Yeah, it's something like that, for example. Yeah, or sex.
Okay.
And the guy said, well, that kind of defeats the purpose, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to train your mind to be directed to where you want it to go,
yes,
as opposed to where it wants to go.
Sure.
And that's where the element of effort is introduced. Is that you could bypass the entire effort bit of it,
Well, it's like
But,
going to the gym and asking for like assistant weightlifting.
Right.
You might as well not lift anything if you're not gonna lift. You know, if you're not gonna make it hard.
Indeed.
So
Yeah.
it's the putting in effort. That's the training part. If you could already do it, you wouldn't need to train. And meditation, essentially, to me anyway, is just basically training of concentration, training of being present in the moment, training your mind to come back when it wanders and to wander less.
That's it.
And then there's all kinds of stuff and realizations and insights that you can gain on top of that. But
Sure. Apparently, they arise with time, right? So it's not something that you want to force or anything of the kind. But as you meditate and your mind goes into this coherent state, some of these realizations start to.
Well, I would say most of them. Well, some may arrive, on their own. But usually there's also teachers pointing out, what to look for. So this idea of non-duality, for example, or oneness, is something. Yeah, that's a different idea. But I mean, they're all different ideas that you might be directed towards to notice that they're true, and that they're experientially true. But I wouldn't say that if you just put anybody on a meditation cushion and set them going for some amount of time, that they'd naturally come up with these ideas themselves.
Well, I actually I wonder about that one. Yesterday I was thinking about that exact point. Because I was listening about a story of the Buddha, or in fact I might have been reading it about in that book that you brought the other day. So Jorma just bought me a book called Path with Heart, I believe.
Yeah, it's by Jack Kornfield.
By Jack Kornfield. I've read something like the first 3 or 4 chapters, and it's a fantastic book. I will definitely do a review on that at some point. But he was talking about a story of the Buddha, and it got me wondering, what was the Buddha chasing? There's stories about how much he meditated. There's stories about how many ascetic practices he put himself through, and then he became enlightened. But what was to say that there was such a thing as enlightenment if you were following that path? Do you know what I mean?
That's an interesting question.
It's like, so what were you chasing if
he
not
was
that?
the first one to reach it,
Yes,
then how did he know there was something to be reached?
Precisely my point.
Question.
I think that this was a gradual thing. I think that people were discovering certain little insights or modalities of the mind as they experimented with certain things, and that there were people way before him who had probably stumbled across many of these things, and he just took them to a different level or became better at communicating them. But who's to say?
Well, in terms of the Buddha, nobody's to say, because it's 2,500 years in the past. But I mean, there were all kinds of ascetics and yogis and contemplatives in his day already. So
Absolutely.
They were contemplating something, and
Yes.
they were searching for some form of liberation. I'm not entirely convinced. I put much stock in the notion of complete or perfection. When talking about liberation, the idea of an arhat, that's the perfected one or a perfected one.
No.
I think it's all a matter of gradations, and there's more and more skill and more insight that you can gain. I'm not sure there's something that that there is to reach.
No.
That's then also like a complete shift that you can't even return from, so to speak. So I don't think it's useful anyway.
Nah, perhaps certainly not in the light of chasing it. There's one
chasing anything isn't useful
No.
in the Buddhist sense. Anyway.
There is one thing that Shinzen Young was referring to that did catch my ear on that one, and it's what he calls, don't quote me on this one, but it's something along the lines of a figure ground reversal. And what he means by that is that the state that you acquire during your formal meditation practice at some point becomes a trait. In other words, where you normally are mindless and distracted and have these brief windows of clarity during your meditation practice, the more you meditate, the more the meditation state becomes your normal state of being with brief periods of distraction in between. And that shift seems to happen at some point. It perhaps takes years to reach some of that. And Kula Dasa was talking about something similar. He referred to it more along the lines of when the insights that you acquire are no longer philosophical or intellectual, but they are really assimilated to the level of the subconscious. So you fully embody the insight of, say, non-duality, or the insight of impermanence.
Yeah,
is an indication that you're deep into enlightenment territory, so to speak. Not that there's a line to speak of necessarily. Kind of busted my my right calf doing some boosted board about a week ago. There's my crutch. I'm still limping around a little bit, and I'm a little bit worried that this is gonna become painful during the whole retreat, on top of the regular pain of sitting for long periods of time. I hope that's not the case. I got a little bit of meds with me and stuff. Nothing too strong, but just something to keep me going in case stuff gets rough. But other than that, I think we're good to go. I'm extremely curious about this stuff. I have felt, if you remember one of the clips that I did back in Guatemala 2 months ago, I had started practicing long determination sittings. I think the longest one I cracked was something like 1 hour 45 or so. And I can honestly say that my meditation has become deeper from the moment I did that. I did it several times, and I've reached deeper and more tranquil levels of meditation now, just because it makes you much more acquainted with your inner space. And this is something that Kula Dasa was talking about in a clip I was looking at yesterday, where he said, look, you start to grow both your ability to focus and your ability to stay aware, and that's something that you can almost tangibly feel growing as you go into these longer sittings. So I'm very curious about the effect that this is going to have later down the line. I have also heard that the effects of retreats can stay with you for several weeks or months after that. So I'm certainly looking forward to that if it comes. Things I'm not looking forward to. The fact that the alarm bell or the gong goes off at 4:30 in the morning is going to be interesting. I don't particularly like my routine being dictated to me, and I certainly don't like the fact that the food is chosen for me and I have zero, leeway on that one. I've been essentially, I've been sort of treating myself to all kinds of guilty pleasures for the past week because I knew that this was coming. So I'm kind of a happy camper as I step into this. But those are elements that are going to be really interesting, and I'll observe my cravings popping up. Then again, there's something that happens once you know that there's zero choice and that you just can't have what you want, and which is, at some point you probably let go of the whole thing. So we'll see about that. And so I think we're gonna leave it at that. I'm very enthused about this one. Let's see how it goes. Jorma, any last words before we make it into Belgium and go into our little retreat?
No, let's do this, man.
All right, man. Thanks, guys. Cheers. See you around.